The morning sun cast long shadows across the county fairgrounds as I helped Grandpa Joe unload his 1983 International Harvester Combine from our old trailer. The machine looked every bit of its 40 years, rust patches dotting the faded red paint, dents from decades of hard work, and that familiar diesel engine that coughed like an old man with too many cigarettes. "She ain't much to look at, Tommy," Grandpa said, patting the side of his beloved machine. "But she's got heart where it counts." I was about to respond when the roar of a massive truck engine filled the air. A gleaming white semi-trailer rounded the corner, pulling what looked like a machine from the future. The crowd that had been admiring various farm equipment suddenly gravitated toward this newcomer like moths to a flame. The truck came to a stop with a hydraulic hiss, and out stepped a man in his 30s wearing spotless designer jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most folks here made in a week. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, and his smile had that practiced quality of someone used to getting their way. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly, "feast your eyes on the future of farming." The trailer's ramp lowered with mechanical precision, revealing a massive John Deere S780 combine harvester. The machine was pristine. Not a speck of dirt or a single scratch marred its forest green and yellow paint. $300,000 of pure American engineering, the man continued, clearly enjoying the impressed murmurs from the growing crowd. "Marcus Sterling's the name, and this beauty here is going to show you country folks what real farming looks like." Grandpa's weathered hand tightened slightly on his coffee cup, but his expression remained calm. Marcus Sterling surveyed the fairgrounds with the confidence of a man who'd never known failure. His eyes swept past the various vintage tractors and farm equipment until they landed on Grandpa's combine. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "looks like someone brought their museum piece to the wrong event." He strode over to where we stood, his expensive boots clicking on the asphalt. "This thing belongs in a scrapyard, not a county fair." The crowd followed him, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger. Grandpa, however, remained perfectly still, his blue eyes studying Marcus with the patience of a man who'd seen plenty of blowhards in his 78 years. "That's a fine machine you've got there, son," Grandpa said quietly, nodding toward the gleaming John Deere. "Must have cost you a pretty penny." Marcus laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the morning air. "More than this rust bucket's worth, that's for sure. When's the last time this thing actually harvested anything? 1995? "Last season, actually," I interjected, unable to keep quiet any longer. "She pulled in over 200 acres of corn." 200 acres? Marcus scoffed. "My machine here can do that in half a day. This antique probably takes a week, assuming it doesn't break down first." Several people in the crowd nodded, clearly impressed by his shiny new machine and confident demeanor. But I noticed some of the older farmers exchanging glances, their expressions unreadable. "Tell you what, old-timer," Marcus continued, "I'll give you 5,000 cash for that scrap metal and you can put it towards something more appropriate for someone your age." Grandpa Joe set down his coffee cup with deliberate care and stepped closer to Marcus. Despite being several inches shorter and decades older, there was something in his bearing that made the younger man unconsciously take a step back. "That's mighty generous of you, son," Grandpa said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. "But I think I'll keep her. You see, this old girl and I have been through a lot together." Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Suit yourself. Just don't blame me when you're the laughingstock of the pulling contest this afternoon." "Pulling contest?" I asked, looking between them. "Oh, you didn't know?" Marcus's grin widened. "Every year, the fair holds a combine pulling competition. Whoever can pull the weighted sled the farthest wins. I figured it would be a good way to demonstrate the superiority of modern engineering over—" He gestured dismissively at Grandpa's machine. "Whatever that is." The crowd murmured with interest. The pulling contest was indeed a tradition, though it had been several years since anyone had taken it seriously. "You interested in entering, Joe?" called out Bill Henderson, the fair organizer, who had been listening from the edge of the crowd. Grandpa was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from Marcus to his pristine combine, then back to his own weathered machine. "I reckon I might be," he said finally. Marcus clapped his hands together. "Excellent. This should be entertaining. David versus Goliath, except this time Goliath has a $300,000 advantage." As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about the upcoming contest, I pulled Grandpa aside. "Are you sure about this? That machine of his is brand new, and ours." "Has been pulling loads since before that boy was born," Grandpa finished quietly. Back at our setup area, I watched Grandpa run his hands over the combine's engine housing with the familiarity of a man greeting an old friend. "Tell me about her history again," I said, genuinely curious. Grandpa's eyes took on that distant look they got when he was remembering. "Bought her in 1983, right off the lot. Your grandmother thought I was crazy, spending that kind of money when we barely had 2 nickels to rub together. But I knew she was special." He popped the hood, revealing an engine that, while old, was meticulously maintained. Every bolt was clean, every hose properly secured. Over the years, I've made some modifications. Nothing fancy, just improvements based on 40 years of learning what works and what doesn't. "What kind of modifications?" I asked, leaning in closer. "Well," Grandpa said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "let's just say she's got a few tricks that Manuel never mentioned." He pointed to various components I didn't recognize. "Upgraded the hydraulic system in '92, rebuilt the transmission in '98 with heavy-duty parts from a friend who worked at the factory. And this engine," he patted the motor affectionately, "she's been bored out, balanced, and tuned more times than I can count." I stared at the machine with new respect. What I'd always seen as just Grandpa's old combine was actually a carefully crafted piece of engineering refined through decades of experience. "Does Marcus know any of this?" I asked. Grandpa's grin was answer enough. "Son, that boy knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. He sees rust and assumes weakness. But sometimes, the strongest steel is the kind that's been tested by time." Word of the afternoon's pulling contest spread through the fairgrounds like wildfire. By lunchtime, it seemed like half the county had heard about the showdown between Marcus Sterling's gleaming new combine and Grandpa Joe's vintage machine. Marcus was holding court near his combine, regaling anyone who would listen with stories of his machine's capabilities. "Computer-controlled everything," he was saying to a group of impressed teenagers. "GPS guidance, automatic header height adjustment. This baby practically drives itself." I felt my jaw clench, but Grandpa placed a calming hand on my shoulder. "Easy, Tommy. Let him talk. Actions speak louder than words. And this afternoon, we'll let our actions do the talking." Around 1 o'clock, Bill Henderson began setting up the pulling track. The weighted sled was a massive contraption, essentially a steel platform loaded with concrete blocks, designed to get progressively harder to pull as it moved forward. "Standard rules apply," Bill announced to the growing crowd. "Each machine gets 1 pull. Farthest distance wins. We'll go in order of registration, which means Joe Morrison goes first, followed by Marcus Sterling." "Perfect," Marcus said loudly. "I'll get to see exactly what I need to beat." The crowd continued to grow as word spread, and I noticed several people I didn't recognize. Probably folks from neighboring counties who'd driven over just to witness the spectacle. Grandpa spent the lunch hour making final adjustments to his machine, checking fluid levels and testing various systems. At 2 o'clock sharp, Bill Henderson's voice boomed across the fairgrounds through a crackling PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's Combine Pulling Contest." The crowd had swollen to several hundred people, more than I'd ever seen at the county fair. Word had spread beyond the agricultural community, and I spotted several people with cameras and even what looked like a local news crew. Our first contestant is a familiar face to most of you. Joe Morrison and his 1983 International Harvester. Joe's been farming in this county for over 50 years. Polite applause rippled through the crowd, though I could hear some murmurs of doubt. Grandpa climbed into the cab with the fluid motion of a man who'd performed this action thousands of times. The old diesel engine coughed to life, settling into its familiar rhythmic rumble. "Now, Joe," Bill called out, "you know the rules. Hook up to the sled, and when I drop this flag, give her everything you've got." Grandpa maneuvered the combine into position with practiced precision. Despite its age, the machine responded to his touch like a well-trained horse. The hookup to the sled was quick and efficient. "Contestants ready?" Bill raised a checkered flag high above his head. The crowd fell silent except for the steady rumble of the combine's engine. Even Marcus had stopped his constant commentary, watching intently from beside his pristine machine. Grandpa raised his hand to signal he was ready. The engine note changed slightly as he adjusted something in the cab. "Pullers ready? Go!" Bill's flag dropped, and Grandpa's combine lurched forward with surprising authority. The sled moved smoothly at first, Grandpa's combine pulling it with steady, determined power. The crowd watched in respectful silence as the old machine found its rhythm. What struck me most was how controlled everything seemed. There was no drama, no wheel spin, just methodical forward progress. 50 feet, Bill called out as they passed the first marker. The sled's weight transfer mechanism was just beginning to engage, adding resistance. Grandpa downshifted smoothly, and the engine note deepened but remained steady. 75 feet. The combine was really working now, but still moving forward with purpose. I could see Grandpa through the cab window, his posture relaxed, hands steady on the controls. 100 feet. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Several people had expected the old machine to stall out much earlier. Marcus's confident smile had faded slightly, replaced by a look of focused attention. The sled was getting noticeably harder to pull now, but Grandpa's combine pressed on, the engine working harder but never seeming to strain. At 125 feet, the machine finally began to slow, the massive weight demanding everything the old International could give. 130, 135, Bill's voice carried across the suddenly quiet fairgrounds. The combine was barely moving now, but it was still moving. Grandpa made one final adjustment, and the machine surged forward another few feet before finally coming to a stop. 142 feet for Joe Morrison, Bill announced, and the crowd erupted in surprised applause. It was a respectable pull by any standard, and far better than most had expected from the 40-year-old machine. Grandpa climbed down from the cab with a satisfied nod, accepting congratulations from several of the older farmers. But all eyes were now turning to Marcus and his gleaming John Deere. "Well," Marcus said, loud enough for nearby spectators to hear, "that was impressive for an antique. Now let me show you what real power looks like." Marcus Sterling approached his combine with the confidence of a man accustomed to having the best equipment money could buy. The John Deere S780 was an impressive sight, all clean lines and modern engineering. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bill announced, "our second contestant is Marcus Sterling with his brand new John Deere S780. This machine represents the latest in agricultural technology with over 470 horsepower. Marcus climbed into the spacious cab, which looked more like the cockpit of a commercial airliner than farm equipment. Multiple screens displayed various readouts, and the whole setup screamed expensive sophistication. The John Deere's engine came to life with a smooth, powerful purr that was completely different from Grandpa's machine. Where the International had character and personality, this engine was all business, refined, controlled, and undeniably powerful. Marcus positioned the combine with mechanical precision, the GPS guidance system ensuring perfect alignment. The hookup to the sled was accomplished with hydraulic efficiency. "This is it, folks," Marcus called out through his open window. "Time to see what $300,000 can do." Bill raised the flag again. "Contestants ready?" Marcus gave a confident thumbs up, making adjustments on his various control screens. "Pullers ready? Go!" The John Deere shot forward with impressive authority. The initial acceleration was noticeably faster than Grandpa's more measured approach, and the sled moved smoothly behind the powerful machine. 75 feet, Bill called out. The John Deere was still pulling strongly, its advanced transmission automatically adjusting to maintain optimal power delivery. 100 feet! The modern combine was living up to its reputation, pulling the increasingly heavy sled with apparent ease. 125 feet. Bill's voice carried across the fairgrounds as Marcus's John Deere continued its strong pull. The crowd was impressed. The modern machine was clearly demonstrating its superior power and technology. 140 feet! The John Deere had matched Grandpa's distance and was still moving forward steadily. Marcus's earlier boasting seemed justified as his machine approached what looked like an easy victory. But then, something changed. At around 145 feet, the sled's weight transfer mechanism engaged more aggressively, and suddenly the John Deere began to struggle. The smooth forward progress became more labored, and I could see Marcus frantically adjusting controls in his cab. 148 feet! The machine was still moving, but barely. Marcus was clearly pushing every system to its limit, and the engine note had risen to an urgent whine. "Come on, baby," I heard him mutter through his open window. "Don't fail me now." The John Deere managed another few feet, reaching 152 feet before the wheels began to spin uselessly in the dirt. Marcus tried several different approaches, adjusting his transmission settings, modifying his throttle input, even engaging what looked like some kind of traction control system, but the machine had reached its limit. 152 feet for Marcus Sterling, Bill announced, and the crowd applauded politely. It was indeed a good pull, 10 feet farther than Grandpa's machine had managed. Marcus climbed down from his cab with a satisfied grin, accepting congratulations from the crowd. "Not bad for a day's work," he said, clearly pleased with his performance. He walked over to where Grandpa and I were standing. "Good pull, old-timer," he said, extending his hand. "Your machine's got more life in it than I thought. But as you can see, there's just no substitute for modern engineering and raw power." Grandpa shook his hand politely. "You did real good, son. That's a fine machine you've got there." Marcus nodded, already turning back toward his combine. "Well, I suppose that settles the question of old versus new." But Bill Henderson wasn't done yet. "Hold on there, Marcus," he called out, consulting his clipboard. "We've still got 3 more contestants." The next 2 pulls were respectable but unremarkable, a 1990s case combine that managed 118 feet, and a newer John Deere that reached 134 feet. The crowd was polite, but clearly considered the real contest to be over. Then Bill made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Our final contestant is a late entry. Seems Joe Morrison wants to make another pull with some adjustments to his machine." Marcus looked confused. "Another pull? That's not how this usually works." "Actually," Bill said, grinning, "the rules allow for mechanical adjustments between pulls as long as it's the same basic machine. Joe asked if he could make some modifications and try again." I looked at Grandpa in surprise. He hadn't mentioned anything about a second pull to me. "What kind of adjustments?" I asked. "Oh, just a few things I've been saving for a special occasion," Grandpa said with a mysterious smile. "Tommy, would you mind helping me with something?" For the next 20 minutes, I watched in fascination as Grandpa made a series of modifications to his combine that I'd never seen before. He adjusted what looked like a boost controller, swapped out some kind of fuel injection component, and made several other changes. "Grandpa, what exactly are you doing?" "Well," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, "remember how I told you I'd made some modifications over the years? Let's just say I haven't shown this old girl everything she can do." The crowd had noticed our activity and was gathering around again, curious about what was happening. Marcus looked particularly interested, though also slightly concerned. "Joe," he called out, "what exactly are you doing over there?" "Just making a few adjustments," Grandpa replied cheerfully. "Nothing that wasn't already part of the machine, just optimizing things a bit." When Grandpa fired up the combine again, even I could tell something was different. The engine note had changed, deeper, more purposeful, with an underlying rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bill announced, clearly enjoying the unexpected drama, "Joe Morrison is making a second pull with his modified 1983 International Harvester." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something special was about to happen. Marcus stood near his own machine, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious concern. Grandpa climbed into the cab with the same fluid motion as before, but there was something different about his demeanor now, a focused intensity that I'd rarely seen. He positioned the combine at the starting line with mechanical precision. "Joe," Bill called out, "you ready for your second pull?" Grandpa raised his hand and the engine note shifted again. Whatever modifications he'd made were clearly working. The old International sounded like it had found a new lease on life. "Pullers ready? Go!" What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about that old machine. Instead of the steady, measured pull we'd seen before, the combine exploded forward with shocking authority. The sled, which had seemed so heavy during the previous pulls, moved behind the International like it was barely there. 50 feet! Bill's voice carried a note of surprise. The combine had covered the distance in half the time of its previous pull. 75 feet! The machine was still accelerating, its engine roaring with a power that seemed impossible for a 40-year-old piece of equipment. 100 feet! The crowd was starting to murmur in amazement. This wasn't the same gentle old combine they'd watched earlier. This was something else entirely. The sled's weight transfer mechanism engaged, but the International barely seemed to notice. Where other machines had started to struggle, Grandpa's combine just downshifted and kept pulling. 125 feet! Bill's voice was rising with excitement as Grandpa's combine continued its relentless forward progress. The crowd had gone from polite interest to genuine amazement. Marcus Sterling stood frozen beside his gleaming John Deere, watching in disbelief as the old International approached and then passed his best distance. "This can't be happening," I heard him mutter. 150 feet! The combine was now pulling the sled farther than Marcus's modern machine had managed, and it was still moving forward with authority. 160 feet! The crowd was cheering now, caught up in the drama of seeing the underdog not just compete, but dominate. The sled was fighting back with everything it had, but the combine pressed on relentlessly. 170 feet! Even I was having trouble believing what I was seeing. The machine I'd grown up around was pulling like a machine possessed. The engine note never wavered, never strained. If anything, it seemed to be getting stronger as the pull continued. Through the cab window, I could see Grandpa's calm, focused expression. This was a man who knew exactly what his machine was capable of. 180 feet! The crowd was on its feet now, cheering wildly. This wasn't just a pulling contest anymore. It was a demonstration of what passion, knowledge, and 40 years of careful engineering could accomplish. Marcus had gone pale, staring at the impossible scene unfolding before him. His $300,000 machine was being thoroughly outclassed by a combine that was older than he was. 190 feet. The International was still moving, still pulling, still defying every expectation. The sled was fighting with everything it had, but Grandpa's machine seemed unstoppable. Finally, at 197 feet, the combine came to a stop. Not because it had reached its limit, but because the sled had reached the end of the track. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, nobody seemed to know how to react to what they'd just witnessed. Then slowly, the applause began, tentative at first, then building to a thunderous ovation. Grandpa climbed down from the cab with the same unhurried grace he'd shown all day, but now the crowd was looking at him with something approaching awe. 197 feet! Bill's voice cracked with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not just a new fair record. That's the farthest pull I've ever seen in 40 years. Marcus Sterling stood motionless beside his John Deere, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. The confident young man who'd arrived that morning was confronting the reality that money couldn't buy everything. Slowly, he walked over to where Grandpa was accepting congratulations. I don't understand, he said, his voice barely audible. How is that possible? Your machine is 40 years old. Mine has twice the horsepower, computer controls, modern engineering. Grandpa looked at him with kindness rather than triumph. Son, you've got a fine machine there, and you pulled it well. But horsepower isn't everything. Sometimes experience matters more than technology. But the modifications you made, Marcus pressed. What did you do to it? Nothing that wasn't already there, Grandpa replied. I just woke up some potential that had been sleeping. You see, when they built this old girl, they built her to last. Over the years, I've learned every bolt, every system, every trick she's capable of. Today, I finally let her show what she could really do. Marcus stared at the old combine with new eyes. I underestimated you. Both of you. That you did, Grandpa agreed gently. But that's a mistake a lot of folks make. They see age and assume weakness, see rust and think worthless. But sometimes the strongest things are the ones that have been tested by time. As the sun began to set over the fairgrounds, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the conversations continued. Marcus Sterling spent a long time examining Grandpa's International, asking detailed questions about the modifications and the machine's history. I owe you an apology, he said finally, extending his hand to Grandpa. I came here thinking I knew everything about farming and equipment. I was wrong. No harm done, son, Grandpa replied, shaking his hand firmly. We all got to learn somehow. The important thing is that you're willing to listen. Would you be willing to teach me? Marcus asked hesitantly. About the modifications? About working with older equipment? I realize now that there's a lot I don't know. Grandpa's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. I'd be honored to. But first, let me give you some advice. Respect the old ways before you dismiss them. There's wisdom in things that have survived. As we loaded the combine back onto our trailer, I couldn't help but feel proud of what Grandpa had accomplished. He'd done more than just win a pulling contest. He'd demonstrated the value of experience, patience, and deep knowledge. Grandpa, I said as we secured the last tie-down, why didn't you ever tell me what that old machine could really do? He chuckled, patting the side of the combine one more time. Tommy, some lessons are better learned than told. Today wasn't really about proving anything to that young man. It was about showing everyone that there's value in the old ways. Sometimes the best machines aren't the newest ones, but the ones that have been loved and understood. As we drove home through the gathering darkness, I looked back at the combine on our trailer with new respect. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a testament to the power of knowledge, experience, and the unbreakable bond between a craftsman and his tools. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed this tale of respect, heritage, and the surprising power that can come from understanding and caring for the tools that serve us. Please let me know in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. I love hearing from viewers all around the globe, and if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel for more heartwarming tales like this one. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what's newest, but from what's been tested by time and treated with respect.